You're listening to Messianic Insight, the live podcast from Kehilat Etz Chaim, Tree of Life Congregation in Toronto, with Messianic Rabbi Ben Wolman.
We're going to go back to the topic of the Mishkan today, and I'm going to be talking, as I promised, about the house of God as a unique place where God not just meets his people, but actually prepares us in an extraordinary way. And that this is an extraordinary place of greater depth and nuance than we really can understand in certain ways. And why that is and how that is. And I can't even really fully explicate that today. I'm really going to touch on it in a way that will just kind of open your perspective a little bit, because God comes to meet us in a reality, in a place that he has designated, and this is an amazing thing. But there's something deeper going on than we can perceive. And that's what I want to touch on, not because I fully comprehend this, but because I really simply want to invite you to, in a sense, ruminate, think about these things a little differently than we have before. So let's open with a word of prayer. And we're going to seek the Lord. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father and our King. In times of change, in times of crisis even, when the world is forced to act differently, it's appropriate to think differently. It's appropriate to seek your face and to be more urgent about it, but then also to think more deeply about it. And to, in a sense, Lord, take hold of the very hem of the garment of Messiah, so that indeed we can be not only healed, but be people who are sources of healing. So open up our minds, Father, to hear what you have to say to us. Indeed, open our minds in a fresh way to the reality of Yeshua. Amen. Amen. You know, some of you remember who Carl Sagan is. He became quite famous a few decades ago because he was talking a lot about the universe. And he had a really interesting way of approaching and seeing things. And one of them is expressed by this phrase: to make an apple pie from scratch, first you have to make the universe. Now, this is a very unique way of seeing, making an apple pie. But it's a great way of approaching the challenge of what it means to make a Mishkan, to make a house for God. Because for a nation of former slaves, to make a house of God in the wilderness, a place where God will dwell in our midst, in the desert, first they need to experience and have a relationship with the holy God. Amen. And God, first of all, had to create a covenant. He had to create a nation. He had to actually create them. For you to come into a relationship with God, first you had to realize you needed a relationship with a creator. Everything really had to change once you came into a changed relationship with him. And that's what happened to Israel. But They weren't really that open to it. When you think about it, God said, I'm going to come into your midst. And by the way, how did the people respond? Where they were like totally open to it? Yeah, this is what we're looking for. No, what they said. Did the miracles in Egypt make them ready? Did the trembling mountain of Sinai actually make them prepared for what God was going to do? And by the way, as soon as it started happening, did they actually rush to say, oh, yes, isn't this wonderful? God's in our midst. Listen to what they said. The people saw the thunder and lightning, heard the trumpet, saw the mountain. They trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance, and they said to Moshe, speak to us yourself, we will listen, but do not have God speak to us or we will die. They basically said, look, Moshe, this is great. Why don't you go up and meet him? We'll be right down here. We've got your back. Yeah, that's what happens. Yeah, to prepare a house for God, you have to have a relationship with him. But first, you need to actually have to want the relationship. But were we wanting this relationship? Actually, we were resisting it with every fiber of our being. And the truth of the matter is, yes, we want to have a relationship with holy God. But how holy do we usually feel? Not usually all that holy. This phrase, it took one day for God to take his people out of Egypt, but it took 40 years to take Egypt out of his people, is part of the problem. And you know what? I have to tell you something. It took one moment for me to realize that I could have peace with God. But it takes me a long time to deal with all the aspects of my own personality that are resisting the peace with God I really need. And I have to work through a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff in me that's actually saying, I'm not sure that I want that area to be holy. And wait a minute, that's got to be holy? And wait a minute, am I all that interested in being all that holy? This is a challenge for us. It doesn't happen instantly. Do I really want to entrust every aspect of my life? We have to fight to learn to leave every aspect of our life to God. And it's a battle. It's a struggle. And he calls them to build this place. Do we understand what they were doing? Look what he says. We read it in Isaiah 66. Heaven is my throne. The earth is my footstool. Where is the house you will build for me? I'm the creator. You're going to build a house for me? Do you really understand what I'm calling you to do when I tell you build a house for me? What are you really doing? That's the question I wanted to ask myself in a more deep way. And I had to go back to this question: could anything truly draw us near to the glory of the heavens? And look what the writer of Hebrews says. Think about it. God actually had the model of the tabernacle, the model of this place of worship all ready for Moshe at the very moment when he was trying to see what does God want. God said, I can show it right to you. So much so that we read in Revelation, the temple of the God in heaven was opened, and the Ark of the Covenant was seen in his temple. In other words, God says, really, I have a heavenly temple already. But I want you to have a temple too. Well, can anything truly draw us near to the glory of the heavens? Is there anything to compare with the glory of God's heavenly throne? There is something. There is something And my friends, we all have it. It's called a brain. We all have one. And the brain is a miracle. You know, through most of history, men never really understood or comprehended the brain. And the truth is, even today, we are still struggling to comprehend this 3-pound item that you are walking underneath every day. But do you really, we are just really just beginning to understand it. But it is an electronic marvel far beyond any computer that we can yet create. You know, we think we are marvels of technology. The creation of a brain is far beyond us. It's still far beyond us. I mean, we can have supercomputers that can fill a room this size, that can do amazing things, computationally, etc. But to think, create emotional life and emotional balance, you know, nobody yet has figured out the mystery of consciousness yet. How to create what we call a sentient being, one that is fully conscious. This is still a mystery. And by the way, that incredible electronic marvel of your brain, those brain connectors, you know, compared to your heart, you know, your heart moves at a very specific, your brain neurons, they are moving at 268 miles per hour to connect areas in your brain, which, by the way, are more numerous than the known stars in the galaxy. It contains more than 100 billion connections. There are 100 billion connections in your brain. You know, you ask that question. You know, we look out into the heavens and say, wow, is there anything greater than that? Yes, it's hidden. It's the means by which you perceive it. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. And you ask that question, well, how is it that God would want to speak to me? Well, this is that unique instrument that has allowed humanity to create civilizations that have overcome the most basic challenges of survival. This is the instrument that has allowed us to overcome hunger, the ravages of disease which normally killed millions. We are counting the number of people who are struggling and some who have perished from the coronavirus. But in days of old, plagues killed millions, quite commonly. And even the last great pandemic of 1918 killed some 50 million people around the world. We do not fear that number today because we're dealing with it. But what has equipped us to do this? Well, the basic thing is we have a piece of equipment, all of us, and God has given it to us. And not only does it keep us from hunger and disease, but the constant dangers of our environment have been controlled largely by this instrument, which God has given us. And we think we are really all that smart. You know, we have a lot of pride about everything we've done. Man, we're good. But one of the amazing things, too, is that we keep learning stuff about our brain that surprises us. When I was a child 50 years ago, we had a very specific expectation about the human brain. We were told you only have a certain number of brain cells, and that's it. How many of you remember being taught that? Yeah. You were told only so many brain cells. Whatever happens, you know, yeah, that's all you get. That was totally wrong. It's again, I'll repeat something I've said before. I guess I'm pretty boring on this point. But I say to people say to me, how come the Bible doesn't have accurate scientific facts in it? And the reason is because our accurate scientific facts keep changing every decade or so, and the Bible would have to be rewritten if God wrote it that way. We keep thinking facts are facts. Actually, the truth is we have been learning that the brain is malleable, plastic, and changes. This instrument that we've been given actually is transformable, but it is also shapeable because we are not only fearfully and wonderfully made, we are sinners to the furthest degree we possibly can be because we are a fallen people. And we have originally had a meaningful, growing relationship with our Creator, but that relationship has been severed, and we struggle with something else. We struggle because we are coping with a fallen character. We are struggling with the consequences of a brain divided. It's a brain struggling because it was originally wired for joy and health and seeking that which is best. But now, what it seeks out is that which simply makes it feel good. And that can be a lot of things that are not healthy and are not morally connected with our Creator. And this is what it's led to. Today, our miraculous brain has been rewired because the brain you have is constantly being reshaped by what you do. In other words, what you do creates and recreates the brain you get. So think about our world. We are constantly struggling between stress and gratification. That's where our brain is at. I can't imagine a world worse. I can't imagine a world that could be the worst possible place to be constantly bombarded by bad news. And yet poor nutrition, lack of sleep, being out of touch with nature, and being really out of touch with spiritual health has meant that our world wires us now to remain dissatisfied, depressed, and chronically unable to be gratified. That's what's happened with our brain. Now, Despite our global vision, what we are living in now is the consequences of being vulnerable to a global community that is a lot more fractured than we had expected, and is in certain ways struggling to cope with crises because of the way we've wired ourselves. Now, the interesting thing is, this is what God has addressed by what we call Tikkun Olam, which is the healing of the nations and the master healer himself, which is Yeshua. Who is Yeshua? Yeshua alone is the master intercessor of a wired world, struggling because we've screwed things up at the very center of the place where we thought we were going to master the world. Now, this is the interesting thing about the Mishkan, and we are going right back to the purpose of the tabernacle here. The reason God meets with us is not because we've prayed for him to do so or because he sees we're in crisis. It is his willingness to meet with us that transforms our situation. His willingness, his choice. Because where does the command to build a place of meeting come from? Does it come from Moses? Does it come from the people? Who instructs us to make this place? And who says, let me give you the entire plan of what it's going to be like? That's the fascinating thing. The real healing of the world is actually coming out of a place which will be the model, not just for future temples, but it is a model for peace with God. Now, that is what the temple is about. That's what the Mishkan is about. This is a place where God says, come so that you can have peace with me no matter how you screwed up your brain. Think about it. You think you are the smartest thing on the planet. You're the height of creation. You think you've got it all figured out. But wait a minute. I need you to be able to find sacred space and time. So first of all, I'm going to provide you with a place of moral cleansing. That's the first thing. What do you do when you go into the Mishkan? What's the first thing that happens when you went into this place? What was the first thing right there? It was the altar of sacrifice, right? That's the first thing you did. And what was the benefit of that? You were cleansed. What did God do with the blood? I've described this to you before. What does he do on the altar? Does he take it and say, I think we need a little blood here, a little blood? No! He splashes it on the altar. Let's cleanse that thing out. Whoa. Yeah, don't you wish somebody could do that to your brain sometimes? Right? Don't you? Oh, Lord, just wash it out. Man, please. That's what God does with the blood. I have given you the blood to cleanse you. And by the way, what does he tell you to do? How about the priests? Does he say, and remember, the priests are good as they are? He says, get them cleansed. They better keep washing. You know, we are walking around saying, we got to keep washing our hands. That's a pretty good reminder. That's what the priests had to do. Why not? They touched blood all the time, the most dirty thing imaginable. In any hospital, the dirtiest thing around is the blood. But for God, it's a cleanser. It's a sign of his cleansing. You know why? Because only he can cleanse with the blood. He's the only one who can cleanse with blood. That's the first thing, moral cleansing and clarity through sacrifice. And remember what I've told you before. You don't have, what if you've got nothing? You know, Lord, I got nothing. I don't have a lamb. I know, you go to your backyard today, you won't find a lamb. All right? I know. But what you do have, whatever it is, it's good enough. Even if it's just a handful of flour. You're cleansed. You're going to be clean. I will accept you. I will receive you. God says, whatever you bring, that's enough. And then encouragement. The priest draws you near. And you see that there are other means by which he has provided cleansing and restoration. There's the great lampstand, which reminds you he's light. There's the place of showbread. He's the God who provides. There's the place of incense that reminds us your prayers are being heard. Each one of these is an encouragement. Reflect, draw close to the holy. Each altar is an invitation to learn more spiritual truth. And by the way, what else does he give you? He gives you the Shabbat. He gives you a whole day of freedom where he says, stop working, stop stressing, and focus on me. He gives you the freedom of place, the freedom of time, and he invites you into prayer. You know, God basically says what this world cannot do, which is get off the 24-hour news cycle, cleanse your brain, get right with me, be still and know that I am God. God has equipped us through his Mishkan to address what is the ultimate problem, a disease that we have created for ourselves, which is permanent stress. All because we thought we were smarter than everything else on the planet. And we thought we were even greater than, there is no God. Come on. How many of us are walking around with that attitude? How many people around us are walking around with that attitude? And what's it done for them? And what's it doing for them now? I'm not worried about God. I've got all my stocks in a row. Yeah, well, that I hope that works out for you. And the truth is, this is one of the things that fascinates people who are experts in this area, because they are fascinated by this challenge. Is the brain wired for worship? This incredibly complex instrument that you've been given actually seeks that which is higher. Inside your brain is a galaxy of thoughts, but what it is really seeking is that which is higher, better, and that which is ultimate good. It's seeking something that's an ultimate good, not simply that which makes us happy. The greatest reflectors on the issue of what gives a person happiness, the greatest philosophers have always sought ultimate good, haven't they? They don't see, The great philosophers don't say, hey, eat, drink, and be merry for tomorrow, you know. They say, there is a higher, greater good. For many years, I had a phrase on a picture I kept in my office. The phrase, it was essentially a long paragraph from a great Roman philosopher called Epictetus. Epictetus was a slave who became a philosopher. And at one point he said these things. All around us, people talk about God or gods. And there are many views about gods and views about if there is a God. There are those who say maybe there is such a thing or maybe not. There are others who say perhaps there is such a God, but he stays away from us. Or there are others who say perhaps there is such a God who does have some kind of relationship with men. And then Epictetus says this. And then there are those of us who say, I move not without thy word. The highest minds have always sought the greatest good. And the miracle of the tabernacle really for us is that it is a gateway into that relationship for our best. The unique calling of the high priest teaches us that this is the unique purpose of the high priest because he's our guide into this relationship. You know, you're not supposed to aspire to be the high priest. A high priest is given this task simply for that unique purpose so that the rest of us can fulfill our calling. So Aaron bears the names of the sons of Israel on his breastplate of judgment over his heart, and he does so to make he does so to make intercession for us. And there's that engraving on a signet over his. By the way, it's over his head, right around the brain. And you know what it says? Holiness to the Lord. Holiness to the Lord. How many of us wish that could be truly impressed on all our thoughts? Holiness to the Lord. But how much more is it true that it says, he bears the iniquity of the holy things which the children of Israel hallow in their holy gifts, that they may be accepted before the Lord. That was the purpose of the high priest. He is the ultimate intercessor. And he does so not because he has to do, he has this unique thing that we should all aspire to, but so that we can be freed to fulfill our purpose. In the time of Yeshua, the high priesthood was a corrupted thing. And it was a source of shame, actually, for the spiritual people of Israel. But this is the amazing thing that takes place that the writer of Hebrews speaks about, the writer to the Messianic Jews around the world. This is what he says. When Messiah appeared as our high priest, he went through a greater and more perfect tent, which is not man-made. Essentially, he entered heaven itself. He entered the ultimate Mishkan once and for all. For if sprinkling ceremonially unclean persons with the blood of goats and bulls, the ashes of a heifer restores outward purity, how much more will the blood of Messiah, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself to God as a sacrifice without blemish, will purify our conscience, purify our minds from works that lead to death so that we can serve the living God. Think about it for a moment. We've always kind of thought of this Mishkan as this kind of, crude place to bring sacrifices. This is a place where God is modeling for humanity a transformative program to free your wired brain. A completely different thing. We think it's a crude tent in the desert. Maybe God instead is saying, I'm going to save you from yourselves. I'm going to give you a place of a real new cleansing and new beginning. Wouldn't that be an amazing thing to find in a world where we pull out a cell phone and think, man, I can communicate with anybody. By the way, I just found out yesterday, watching CNN, that your phone is probably one of the dirtiest things in your pocket. It's carrying microbes from everything you've touched. Man, we're smart. We figured out how to carry around every microbe we've possibly encountered all day. But you see, the point of this really is not because the Mishkan is a place we all have to go. The purpose of this really is so that we should know something else, that we're the Mishkan. What God is doing in us is putting the temple in here. That's what it's about. Because, man, we don't need the cleansing out there. We need the cleansing in here. Don't you know you people are God's temple? And God's Spirit lives in you. For God's temple is holy, and you yourselves are that temple. I don't want to belabor this. I know we've had a long service, and I appreciate your time and the grace of this situation. But I was reading this book, Brainwash, by a couple of doctors. And they point out this. A lot of us are living in a perpetual state of anxiety and disquietude, surrounded by a constant flow of negative news. They wrote this a few years ago. They could have said it yesterday, and it would be even more true this morning. As a result of this, though, we have trouble making wise, well-thought-out decisions, and it leaves us feeling out of control and overwhelmed. How much more, then, are we in need of a real high priest to come into our temple? And listen to the wise words of some people who have really thought about this issue. They're not necessarily believers, but they are some of the greatest minds and some of the most accomplished people of the last few centuries. Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie probably built your local library and you don't even know it. Mark Twain. Johann von Goethe. They're all things that you can learn from. These are men who have thought deeply on the most important things. You know what Carnegie said? He was one of the wealthiest men who ever lived. He said, the secret, he said, I found is people will tell you, don't put all your eggs in one basket. They're all wrong. Learn to do one thing well and do it well. Simplify your thinking. Don't become overly complex. Simplify your thinking. Mark Twain, the world gives its greatest rewards to people who can keep their minds working on a small thing well. Wow, no, we are so scattered in our attitudes and in our thinking. These people are saying focus. And Goethe, things that matter most must never be at the mercy of that which matters least. You know what? When you are wired right now to take in every piece of bad news, you are at the mercy of all the things that matter least, because you are not focusing on the things that matter most of the time. I want to ask you this question for your life. As you create that temple and live this temple and bring real tikkun, this real healing, into your own world, what is the thing that matters most to you? Have you placed that at the center of your temple? Because first, what matters most is your relationship with Yeshua. But what about the thing that matters most in your family life, in your relationships? We have wired our brain currently so that every time something clicks, every click we do is another incentive, in essence, that drives our brain. But it's not what matters. What matters is relationships, the people you love, your walk with God. Instead of thinking about all those other things, what about your vision for your future? Are you making the right plans now instead of driving yourself by worry? You need to enter the tabernacle. That is, enter into the tabernacle of your heart and find out what's most important, because the rest of the world is running around like crazy. But what are you doing to do the most important things for yourself? That's the source of your healing. That is not someone out there with an answer for something else. That is the Lord that needs to take hold of your life. As we close, I want you to think about how his healing of the world is meant to prepare you to really change. The invitation into the temple, to build a temple, to create a place of worship, is actually an invitation to a new identity. Worship shapes our identity. Who are you? In the midst of a world in crisis, God says, come close to me. That's really what the Mishkan is. Come close to me, and I will heal you, restore you. I will wash you. I will make you holy, because you are wholly mine. You are meant to be in relationship with me. You are holy to me. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we are in a world that could drive us in so many different directions. Father, help us to know the priority right now. Our priority right now, to keep it simple, so that the things that matter least are not keeping us at their mercy. Instead, the things that matter most are our priority. Secondly, Lord, we need to worship you and focus on allowing you to heal us. There are a lot of things that we're told to do, but the most important thing right now is to allow Yeshua to heal us, teach us, encourage us, and grow in us the character of Yeshua. And grow in us this spiritual center where we can truly come to maturity in Yeshua. So thank you, Lord, for your provision. You are Adonai Ra, the God who provided. And open our hearts to your reality. In Yeshua's name. Amen. Amen.